like to introduce Marta Piekarska, who serves as the Director of Ecosystem at Hyperledger, which is a role I think I can well understand because I've taken a deep interest in various ecosystems around the Bitcoin space over the last few years. She has an array of experience, but formerly in security and privacy in the telecommunications space. But in 2015, she took the dive down the rabbit hole into the blockchain world through joining Blockstream and other Bitcoin-related companies. And as part of her role with Hyperledger, she's involved in evangelizing the technology at conferences around the world. I suppose helping enterprise to actually understand what blockchain is all about and how it can benefit them. So for a more business-oriented presentation today, please welcome Marta, who's going to be talking about leveraging blockchain technology for business. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure being here. I must say, I wish we could do it in person. I think we all wish we could just meet finally. I'm fed up with my own little room. But while we all still online, at least it gives me an opportunity to speak to you at your homes, at your offices, without the need to travel, without the need to destroying the environment. As Steve mentioned, my name is Marta Piekarska. I've been with Hyperledger for 4 years, and my talk today, I'll cover some of the technical stuff as well, but really wanted to focus on case studies. So I'll tell you a bit more about Hyperledger, and then we will go into the use cases that have been implemented by members of Hyperledger, and I'll tell you a bit more of who are members of Hyperledger. And then if we have time, I wanted to cover a few things about how to get involved, because Hyperledger is an open source community and we welcome everyone. We truly believe that there is a space and opportunity for every single person to contribute to Hyperledger, no matter if you're just starting your adventure with coding, if you're a professional, or if you're a business person who has no idea about coding. And this is a mission of the Linux Foundation as well, which hosts Hyperledger. It actually all started with Linux, the operating system that was collectively developed and freely licensed. We wanted to provide Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, the operating system, a neutral home to promote the project and grow the market, host events, provide legal defense and infrastructure. Basically, you know, what happens if Linus Torvalds gets hit by a bus? There needed to be a space where developers that were freely contributing to the code base and the source would still have somewhere to go. It couldn't just disappear with Linus. But Linux Foundation is much more than just Linux, actually. Over the years, we've developed over 120 different projects. It really varies. Some people say 80, some people say 200, so roughly 120. It really depends on what you call a project. But the projects are always governed in a very similar way. So we take an industry that is interested in developing something with the use of open source. Next, we gather enterprises and the open source community, seeing if there's interest to try to create a project. We build a charter around it, build a membership structure and the governance model that is usually very similar from project to project. That's what Linux Foundation provides. And finally, start the project, start with some staff. So we find an executive director, we create the board of directors and so on. And from these initiatives over the last 20 years that Linux Foundation has existed, we developed some of the projects that are very well known to all you developers out there. I'm sure you heard about Node.js or Cloud Native Computing Foundation, Kubernetes, and so on. There are also projects that are very small and not very well known, like Automotive Grade Linux or EdgeX or LF Energy, one of the smaller projects we have. But all of them serve the same purpose: bring people together to collaborate on open source tools, framework, code bases to advance industry. And we believe maybe foolishly, but we believe that in the Linux Foundation, that we, together with our broader community, are creating the world's largest technology investment to solve world's biggest problems by sharing the knowledge, the experience, and the expertise we have. Um, we we are dedicated to our goal and our plan. So 4 years ago, 3.5, 4 years ago, Hyperledger was introduced. Hyperledger was created as an open source collaborative effort to advance cross-industry blockchain technologies. It was hosted by the Linux Foundation, and it became a very global collaboration. It started with 30 companies. So many people know about IBM being one of the sponsors of Hyperledger. It actually it was 30 companies, including Blockstream, where I worked at the time. That's where I first learned about Hyperledger. It was also Intel. Digital Assets gave us our name. So Hyperledger as a name came from Digital Assets. And the two code bases, the two founding code bases, came from IBM, who was doing their internal project on permissioned blockchain, and Intel, who was doing their project. This was Fabric and Sawtooth Lake, later renamed when it came to Hyperledger, Hyperledger Fabric and Hyperledger Sawtooth. Over the course of the years, we developed many more projects. Currently, we have actually 16 different projects. These span across libraries, tools, and distributed ledgers. And each kind of category has its specifics. That, distributed ledgers are the base that you use in order to create the solutions built on top of it. So you take the framework, which is defined by the governance, the approach to smart contracts, the programming language it's used, and the consensus mechanism. That distinguishes one framework on one DLT from another. And then you build solutions using that technology that is provided by the open source community. Then we have libraries, which are shared across all common projects and are really focusing or looking at how can we save people from re-implementing the same thing over and over again. Tools help the community investigate and analyze their solutions. 3 of our releases are production ready, so they are in 1.0 or higher. As a matter of fact, Hyperledger Fabric is in 2.0. We have 15 active community working groups and special interest groups that are open to public. So anything that we do in Hyperledger when it comes to technology and involvement is open to anyone. We are not pay to play. You don't need to be a member to access those working groups or meetups or any kind of code bases. However, we do have membership. These are enterprises. We do not have individual members. These members span all across the world. We have over 50 members in China, member companies in China. About 30% is in Europe. About 50% are in Americas. And Hyperledger is really choose your own adventure. We say that it's a do-ocracy. So the more you do, the more impact you have. And this really means that when you come to Hyperledger community, you need to kind of decide, how do you want to contribute? How do you want to get involved? Do you want to code? Do you want to help with creating written content? Or do you want to just participate in meetings and contribute your thoughts and thought leadership? And then there are various ways that you can go down that route. The code route is definitely much more technical and much more hands-on. Writing helps you get into the coding. I think for many people, it's kind of a gateway towards getting into the deeper technical contributions. But then business people, they have loads of experience, they have loads of knowledge that they could share and build use cases and feed to the developers their needs for features, as well as observations around bugs. As I mentioned, Hyperledger is technical community is 100% open. It is never pay to play, and I can't underline it because we are very proud of it. And we are very invested in making sure that everything that happens in Hyperledger is welcoming, it's inclusive, that we promote diversity, and we listen to everyone. And the collaborative software development approach really ensures transparency and longevity required to bring blockchain forward to the commercial adoption. With that strong emphasis on open source, on having all the code and all the work done under Apache 2.0 license, we make sure that even if a bigger player steps down, doesn't want to contribute anymore, doesn't have the resources, it doesn't really mind. We don't really mind because there's a vast big community that it will pick up the project if the project is important enough to them. And we are led by a very diverse group of technical contributors. As I mentioned, they are from all over the world. We are very much vendor neutral. And I know, some people confuse still Hyperledger with some of our funding members. But we really try to be really agnostic when it comes to vendors and technologies. We do not have favorite children in our house. Our greenhouse, as we call it, welcomes every kind of project. The philosophy that Brian Bellendorf, our executive director, had behind Hyperledger was to create a space where anybody can come with a seed of their idea and propose it to the community. If the community thinks that this seed of an idea is something that is interesting, if the developer manages to plant that seed of idea into everyone's head, and everyone in our greenhouse starts contributing, or part of our greenhouse starts contributing, fostering that plant, watering it, feeding it code, it will bloom into something beautiful and everybody will be able to benefit from its fruits. However, we also realize that long term, probably some projects will not survive because not every plant survives. And if the community loses interest in a project, we have to accept it as well. So only when you hear that a project is in active state, can you be sure that the code will survive, that we believe that it's there in for a long run. All the code bases that are in incubation state, we will do everything we can to support it and we'll gather the community, but we can't ensure or give you guarantees around the code surviving whatever happens. As I mentioned, we kind of divide the greenhouse between distributed ledgers, libraries, tools, domain-specific projects, there's only one as you can see, Hyperledger Grid, and Hyperledger Labs, which is our R&D center. That's where developers come when they come up with a cool idea and they really want to continue working on it, but they want to build a community around it. So the entry barrier is much lower, but also, the support that you get from Hyperledger is slightly less. So Hyperledger projects always have a similar architecture, which is we provide the tools, which is the common software license, the certificate of origin as an IP framework, all the collaboration tools that we set up, we provide the promotion and branding, and we put in place security processes and practices for bugs. The code is being developed by a team of developer volunteers. These are people that work for our members and quite often are mandated by their employer to contribute to Hyperledger, but also people who do it on their spare time, no matter if they work for a member company or not. These developers are managing individual roadmaps and release schedules, so it's not up to Hyperledger staff to decide what is the next release feature. And they are also responsible for following Hyperledger policies and requirements and aligning modular code with other projects. We really want that interoperability or the cross collaboration to exist. And then Linux Foundation provides the infrastructure. So me, being one of the employees of the Linux Foundation, executive director, business operations, as well as big communications, marketing, and PR teams that help promote what everybody's doing. Our goals are to create enterprise-grade software, which really will be open source and will provide the code bases to support business transactions. It's always been the case for Hyperledger to that the distributed ledger frameworks that we've been developing or were submitted to Hyperledger, they are focused on enterprises. That means that quite often they are permissioned, and they could be permissioned public or permissioned private networks, but they are always permissioned networks. The community-driven infrastructure means that anybody can really offer their ideas. And our mission is really to build those technical communities and educate the public. We want to build the commercial ecosystem. And actually one of our goals for each year is to make sure that the adoption of distributed ledgers, Hyperledger or not, is progressing. And then there is a growing trust in what distributed ledgers offer. Again, being it Hyperledger or not. So one of the ways that each one of you can start engaging, and probably the easiest way to engage with Hyperledger, is joining community special interest groups and working groups. Special interest groups focus on each vertical. And when I was asked to actually give this talk, the person who invited me said, you know, I'm really fed up with all of this kind of constantly talking about financial services and cryptocurrencies. I hope you'll be able to tell us a bit more about the non-traditional spaces. So here you go. This is the first time you can, or the first site in this presentation that you get into how wide approach and how wide applications of these technologies are. The way that special interest groups are formed is that if there are enough people that are interested in exploring how DLTs can improve or contribute to helping that industry, we just launch a special interest group, and then we, help find contributors, find people to meet. The groups meet online. They've always met online every 2 weeks. As I mentioned, they are open to public. And for instance, in healthcare, we have both doctors, we have pharma companies, as well as people that are just passionate about healthcare, but are deep into the technology. Same with telecom. This group is actually quite academic. We have quite a lot of students that that study networks and systems and want to explore distributed ledgers and telecom. One of the groups that actually is not here, but should be here, which is the Climate Action and Accounting, came out of MIT and Yale, and their project to track the resource usage and looking at how the CO2 emission and pollution, the way that we look at accounts, because effectively Earth and atmosphere is like our bank account. We can only put in as much CO2 before we overflood the Earth, and we can take out as much oxygen before we go into debt, which is actually happening right now. And with that, I managed to, sorry, here we go. I clicked the wrong link. Actually, once you get this presentation, all of this, these link to the groups, so you can just use the slides to go directly into the right group. The working groups focus more on technical stuff. So they focus on the specific aspect of a DLT across all projects and all blockchains. And again, you're welcome to join them. Just expect a bit more technical discussion. When it comes to enterprises adopting Hyperledger technologies and Hyperledger distributed ledgers, half of the blockchain, Forbes Blockchain 50, second year in a row, came or were built on Hyperledger. Not only Hyperledger Fabric, also Sawtooth, Besu, and Iroha, which we feel is a great achievement of our members, not really of us, our members. There are organizations all over, all sizes involved in this community. It's not only about your Accentures and IBMs of this world. It's also about those 3 people companies that are just starting and are being excited about getting into the blockchain space and the DLT space. So if you're interested in updates from Hyperledger community, we launched a specifically targeted towards developer newsletter. You can subscribe right now to it if you'd like. It's a very good way for tracking roadmaps and feature releases. Many people quite often ask me, it's such a big ecosystem and there are so many projects to cut through and to track. How do I know when Fabric is releasing something, or if Fabric decides to cancel its Fab token project? How do I go about it, or where do I learn about it? Well, you should subscribe to Dev Weekly, and we will then be able to communicate with you about it. And I promise you, there won't be a single piece of marketing in there. It's very strict. However, I was asked to talk about business cases. So let me talk about a few projects that we launched just recently, or case studies that we launched just recently that describe projects that are in production, that are real solutions out there. First is has been created and worked on by AAIS, which is an American agency for insurance. OpenIDL is the project that they built, which streamlines the statistical reporting process, which usually provides very little value to the insurance carriers, and also it actually provides insufficient information for insurance regulators. The OpenIDL project offers carriers a secure and reliable blockchain environment for the storage and selective sharing of statistical data, such as policy, premium claims, loss experience data and stuff. And as well as uses AAIS as an authorized statistical agent and advisory organization. So AAIS is one of the peers on this network, but it gives the warranty for analytics. And this means that with access to timely, very accurate information, regulators as well as reporting careers receive a more holistic and dynamic reporting and very good insights into and exposure into market trends. All of the reports are then being back published to the OpenIDL for immutability, for longevity. This project actually is currently becoming a sister project to the Linux Foundation. So we will be having an OpenIDL project that will be kind of hosted by the Linux Foundation, as everybody felt that there is a need for that neutral third party, being Linux Foundation, that will be very hands-off, but will provide the infrastructure the way that we do with other projects. It is using Hyperledger Fabric as the blockchain network. Another project is called Member Pass. It used to be called MyCUID, if you ever heard about it. This is done by actually 2 of our members, CULedger, which is credit union platform, and Evernym, which is one of the more or bigger distributed service providers out there. Evernym is the company that founded the Sovereign Foundation, and Sovereign Foundation is famously holding the world's most stable and biggest instance of Hyperledger in the deployment. So CULedger worked together with Evernym to build a secure anti-fraud identification solution. So the way it works is that credit unions issue a member pass to its members that are vouching, which is kind of vouching for the member's identification. The credit union member is able to hold and control the issue member pass, which can show to any third party. So you get into that verifiable credentials and a verifier and provider and holder triad that happens in self-sovereign identity. And any third party can reliably really identify members using their member pass accreditation or certification that was issued by the credit union. This means that with MemberPass, credit unions can streamline how the initial member identity authentication process is happening across all call centers and really drive up and lobby touch points and make more kind of engaging contributions and engaging systems. This is currently in production. It's very active. And I believe I talked to people from Evernym a couple of days ago, and they said that they were issuing something like 200-300 member passes almost a day at this point. Suramitsu, I promised not to talk about financial industry, but I couldn't help myself because Suramitsu is a small startup in Japan that contributed code base called Hyperledger Iroha. Not many people on this side of the world know about Hyperledger Iroha, while in Asia, it's actually one of the more popular permissioned frameworks. Hyperledger Iroha specifically focuses really on the mobile applications and being very lightweight and very easy to plug and having a mobile SDK. So you can actually run Iroha nodes on Raspberry Pis. That's how easy and lightweight it is. And Backend project was sponsored by the National Bank of Cambodia and is probably one of the first quasi CBDC in production out there. It's not fully CBDC, but the aim was to reach the unbanked population, especially in rural areas, and to promote use of national currency instead of US dollars, which was something that Cambodian government and National Bank of Cambodia were worried about. The liquidity and compliance burden on payment service providers that are not banks is really reduced at this point, and the retail payments can deliver better services at lower costs. So you kind of Hyperledger Iroha is used to facilitate between banks participating in it, as well as merchants and as well as individual users. And finally, Joisto, which is a company out of Finland. They are doing something that they call Joisto Archiver, which is a very interesting document and data storage security service that meets all of the GDPR regulation. For those of you who don't know GDPR, it's General Data Protection Regulation that is basically making everyone's life horribly hard at this point, but makes sure that no data hopefully leaks. So they use distributed ledger to ensure that there is a proof that stored documents and their respective metadata have not been modified. And it's kind of interestingly combining the off-chain storage and cryptographic checksums of the documents and logs the events that happened in the archives to on-chain. So it's an off-chain, on-chain collaboration, which is the way to go with most highly secure, sensitive data. It actually supports as well removal of documents because all refund records in the blockchain regarding the document that has been removed do not contain any identifiable information. So you basically, by removing the original document, you break the relationship with whatever is running on the Hyperledger Fabric node. All of the projects that I've been talking about, you probably can see in the top left corner QR codes. You can snap those and go to the case studies that we published or talks that we published of those companies. So given that I have 10 minutes, I'm not going to spend much time on distributed ledgers and kind of what are the differences. I'm going to scan through it. Um, you know probably Sawtooth. Sawtooth is the second most mature code base. It supports two algorithms, proof of elapsed time and PBFT. It is in production. It's quite popular, especially when it comes to flexible large case solutions. Hyperledger Indy is a project that supports self-sovereign identity. It utilizes zero-knowledge proofs to provide verifiable claims. And it also supports kind of selective disclosure. There are very good talks from our Hyperledger Global forum, which you can go to at the bottom. You have links there. Hyperledger Borrow is one that is probably worth mentioning because it's one of our smaller projects. It was the first one to create an Ethereum virtual machine for permission blockchains. It is now kind of combined with Hyperledger Fabric and Hyperledger Sawtooth, meaning that both Fabric and Sawtooth can run Solidity smart contracts, which is a feature that many were very much looking forward to getting. They say that Hyperledger Borrow is the most boring blockchain, and that's because it's incredibly reliable and it's very well tested and very kind of comprehensive. It uses Tendermint as its default consensus mechanism. I mentioned Iroha, so don't have to spend more time on it. And then Hyperledger Besu. Hyperledger Besu is one of the earlier project or younger projects that we have. It recently came to us, but it came to us very well developed already. It was consensus that contributed that code. Some of you that are in the Ethereum space probably heard about a project Pantheon from the Pegasus team, and that's exactly what Besu is. It's a Ethereum client that can run both on Ethereum public network and private permissioned networks, and testnet networks as well. So it really provides this interesting interoperability between different networks. And it also includes several consensus protocols. So if you are in the Ethereum space, but you want to start flirting a bit with enterprise space, you can check out Besu. They have incredibly good documentation, very good training, and so on. I'm going to skip a few slides here, maybe for, to just stroke a bit of my security ego. Hyperledger Ursa is our shared cryptographic library that enables people and projects to avoid duplicating others' cryptographic work. It's very high standard. It actually supports local cryptography, so like Russian cryptography or China-approved cryptography, so that we can ensure that Hyperledger frameworks can run in countries that normally would not accept American code. Then our newest project, which is one that everybody were quite looking forward to, is Hyperledger Cactus, which is a blockchain integration tool that is designed to allow users to securely integrate different blockchains. The way that you do it is that Cactus serves as the communication layer, and you write plugins for different blockchains to communicate with Cactus. And then Cactus takes care of working with other blockchains when you want to talk with them. So it's more a ledger interaction tool more than atomic swaps. And it's a project that came from Hyperledger Labs. So, it started as a small project between Accenture and Fujitsu. It turned out that they both actually were working on the same problem and were thinking in a fairly similar way. And they started working together and quite swiftly moved from being an idea to being a project within our greenhouse. And the reason why it's called Cactus is because actually the majority of the work was done in Arizona during our Hyperledger Global Forum, which happened in early March this year. So it's really like very fresh code, but because it was in Arizona, and those of you who have been to Arizona will know that it's full of cactus, the code is now called Hyperledger Cactus. If you haven't been involved in an open source project, I know that it could be quite intimidating. So the three things that you can do is feel free to lurk, don't wait for invitation, and just read the code of conduct to know what you're operating under. This is your invitation. This is your time to go to the website and read a blog post and see if you find it interesting. Show up to a special interest group meeting and say that they're all wrong, or maybe start working on a project with someone. Good general guides for getting started with open source are here. There are those four very good kind of guides that we put together, or some of our colleagues from Mozilla and other open source projects have worked. So the basics about the tools: first and foremost, you always will need a Linux Foundation ID, which is a free account. It just helps to really look through or access all of the collaboration tools that we have, which is Jira, which is chat, which is the wiki, which is the mailing lists. It allows you to combine everything into one. It's a very simple process as well. Then we have those 6 collaboration tools, which is the Linux Foundation account that I mentioned, chat, which is a Rocket Chat instance where there is a more online, more real-time discussion, mailing lists. Each project has a mailing list, as well as all the special interest groups and working groups and so on. So loads of mailing lists to join. Some of them are very active, some of them are very not active. All of the code is stored on GitHub. All of the bug reporting is done through Jira, and we have our wiki, which is where all the development is being documented. So this is where you'll find project updates, also what special interest groups and working groups are doing. This is where you'll find also information about technical steering committee, governance, and so on and so forth. If you want to contribute to Hyperledger, first of all, read the contributing guides. It's quite useful. Get a copy of the repository from GitHub. Find the issues that you want to work on, or think of the issues that you want to offer to, or features that you want to offer to the community. Make your changes, create pull requests, and expect comments and address those comments. If you have an idea for a new feature, if you're, for instance, a PhD student that is working on some kind of a project or a paper, and within that paper you want to build a new feature for Iroha or Besu, first I suggest contact the maintainers on the developer list and ask what they think about it. And don't be offended if they think that there are better ways to do it or different ways to do it. This is not against you. This is so that there is a consistency in the thinking and philosophy behind each project. Depending on the project, source code can be found on either Gerrit or GitHub. The Gerrit repository have a read-only mirror on GitHub, just as a side note. The issues are being tracked on either GitHub or Jira, but all security bugs should be reported in Jira. We actually have a bug bounty program. So if you want to earn money, you can try breaking Hyperledger Fabric and get paid for actually breaking it. You don't need to try breaking our website. There is no bug bounty for attacking our website or GitHub for that matter. If you want to learn more because you're just starting the journey, I do suggest you take a look at our certification. We have free courses, which are 4 free open source courses that you can take at any point in time. These are high-level courses, as well as looking more into the in-depth technical aspects of things, and 2 courses on identity. Then we have a developer certification. So if you're at the stage where you are feeling very comfortable with being a Fabric developer or Fabric or Sawtooth administrator, you can take one of those courses. And if you own your own company that is providing training or services, then you can always ask to be certified as a training partner or service provider. I mentioned that. And with that, I can tell you that all are welcome here. And we really want to make sure that we create an inclusive community. So if you feel that the community is in any way offensive, please do let me and my colleagues know. Thank you for listening. I'll take some questions now. And I welcome you to our Hyperledger member community, because now you're part of it.
Thank you very much, Marta. That was really informative. There were a few preconceptions I think I had about Hyperledger, which you've disabused me of in the last little while. And there's certainly an awful lot going on. I've got some questions here, but we usually end up with a comment, so I'll start with that, which is from Stefan. And it's quite simply, thank you for sharing this. Clap, 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 4 claps. So
thank you.
Thank you. I'll have to ask you to forgive my ignorance if what I'm about to say is not the case, but I often hear Hyperledger referred to as a private and permissioned blockchain, and in fact, it looks like it's a set of tools for anybody to create one. So the first part of that question is would you agree with that categorization? And the second part is that I suspect the issue of public versus private blockchain is going to become a very hot topic of debate over the next few years. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the advantages of private.
Sure. So I think that there is a spectrum. There is the private permissioned, and then permissionless public, and then there is the middle ground of permissioned public and permissionless private networks. And depending on what you're doing, you're really looking at a different set of needs. So to come back to your kind of going backwards, what are the advantages? Well, it depends on your use case, right? If you want everybody to use or be able to participate in your DLT solution, because you, for instance, create a cryptocurrency and you want as many people as you can as you can convince to use that cryptocurrency, then you do need a permissionless public network. However, when it comes to things like, say, a system that is requires high auditability and high transparency, but within a very small group of people or very small group of participants, for instance, among hospitals and doctors when it comes to healthcare, then you don't really want a permissionless public network, because obviously, you don't want me to write into your healthcare records information about you having some kind of a STI disease or something, right? You kind of want it to be in control. Only your doctors, not even you, but only your doctors to be able to write into that record. So that's why you need permission private networks. There are a lot of situations, and I hear what people say that it's not a real blockchain. Well, blockchain is just a technology, right? It's a way of storing information in a chain of blocks, and then you use the consensus mechanism, you use the smart contracts, and you build the system, which is a DLT system. Now, the governance that you provide really depends on your use case. Same, even permissionless public systems do need a minimal viable governance, a decision, what will we do when things go wrong?
Yep.
And sorry, forgot to answer the first part, which was about Hyperledger having not only permission private networks. Yes. Hyperledger Sawtooth supports permissionless private networks. And Indy should be considered a private permissionless network, because you can create a system, a credentialing system, when only certain issuers and credential providers can be right to that network, but anybody can verify the credentials.
Okay. I agree with what you're saying, that it's use case dependent, and in some cases you almost certainly might want to maintain either the permissioned or the private elements of it. I have a feeling that there are probably some elements of the corporate community, though, that defaults to the private side or even the permission side because of a lack of comfort. And I think I've seen a pattern over the last last 20 or 30 odd years even. And I'll give two examples. One is the internet and one is cloud. In the early days of the internet, we saw a proliferation of private intranets, companies that simply just weren't comfortable with going out there into the world. But then, 10 years kind of passed, and we found that there were obviously cases where they needed to keep things internal, but a lot of things that they didn't necessarily need to, or that there were advantages to putting them out on the public internet. They started to do that as they gained confidence, and large corporations, especially banks and things like that, they're kind of slow moving. Do you see a similar thing happening with blockchain, with a gradual migration of some of these use cases from private to public?
Not really, quite the opposite, I would say. I totally agree with you. A lot of so I think that what you're talking about is a good example of just companies trying to use DLTs where they really don't need the blockchain, or building a DLT where they really don't need the blockchain. Because when I hear, oh, I really want a blockchain, but I kind of want to remove things from it. And I want it to be just me and maybe my, one of my colleagues that is using it. And we kind of didn't really need a consensus mechanism because they're like, well, then you don't need a distributed ledger. Sorry, like that's not your use case. So I do think that in many cases we are still seeing way too many companies using DLT just because. Although this year, I would say it's a year where I'm seeing much less of it, and it's really like the rubber hits the road, and now we are seeing, okay, well, these didn't make sense, and these really make sense when it comes to different applications. When it comes to, I know, and maybe this is just a cognition bias because I'm in the permission space, but I do have a lot of enterprise members, companies that come to Hyperledger saying, we experimented with the permissionless public space, but we kind of like using Besu. It's mostly moving towards Besu out of all the projects.
Yeah, I work on a public and permissionless blockchain, which I kind of argue there's no such thing as permissionless, but that's another debate. I won't try to have that one here. But one thing that I do find is a lot of businesses start building things or want to build things on a public blockchain, but they actually really do want the permission side of it. So there's appetites for all of that, I think, out there.
I've seen a lot of very successful usages of both. So having, using the permissionless public network for kind of high security assurance and real kind of bulletproofness, if you want. And then using mostly Fabric at this point for having kind of the consortium style of negotiation transaction, creating channels, creating the CouchDBs and so on.
Yeah. I'd like to turn to the open source element of it because this is a particular interest to me. Firstly, I'd like to ask, most open source projects, they kind of need to reach some kind of a critical mass to survive. And there's usually some sort of a bootstrapping process that gets them there. Bitcoin was kind of unique, I suppose, because it had a ready-made community of people who were just waiting for something like that to come along, and that's what created enough developers to give it momentum. How did that happen with Hyperledger?
I think it was basically an answer of what the heck do we do with the Bitcoin from the enterprise world. So I remember when I was back in Blockstream and Hyperledger was just being started, it was initially thought of as a standardization body. And I was actually really against it. And I was actively fighting against creating Hyperledger. As it turns out, not really very rational thing to do. But in general, back in the time, it's 4 years ago, when people were talking about building standards, it's like we still haven't like successfully had one production deployment. Why are we doing standards now? But it was really just these 30 odd companies that were like, there is this Bitcoin space, and it's clearly something that is interesting, and it's clearly something that we kind of want to join. But how do we join? Like, what do we do? And then there was Linux Foundation, which really had experience with doing that for other or other verticals, other industries, and that's how kind of where this critical mass came from. And once it's being launched, having big names like Hitachi, Fujitsu, IBM, Intel behind it, and members of Linux Foundation, so companies that really were already part of the crowd, it was just different projects, that kind of built really the momentum.
Yeah. I noticed on one of your slides, you, I think there were 4 columns and there were different guides for how to get involved in blockchain related or ledger related open source communities. And one thing stuck out to me because I got involved in Bitcoin in 2011, and it was a pretty brutal meritocracy. That was probably how I described the culture.
Yeah.
You needed a little bit of emotional resilience to
Oh,
do
yeah.
And one thing that struck me was that I was involved with Bitcoin for many, many years before I actually ever came across a woman in the space. And it's definitely changed and improved, but it is still the case that it's an extremely male-dominated industry. Do you think that culture contributes to some element there? Because the capability of the women that I've come across in this space is absolutely on a par with everybody else. But I'm interested in finding why the take-up is so slow.
So I think that initially, absolutely, you're right. The culture was, gosh, I remember the first consensus where they had actually ladies, a party where there were ladies painted in gold serving drinks. I was like, God, I'm a very liberal person, but having women being treated just like hostesses and completely not caring about them, I was outraged. And that continued for a bit. But I think this right now, it's actually really changing because this technology is really democratizing, and it's democratizing across, small players versus big players. It's much easier to become successful startup with in the DLT space when fighting the big players. It really is democratizing in terms of parts of the world. I think that this is one of those places, these situations where you have as many really interesting projects happening in China, in Africa, in India, in America, in Europe. It's all over the place. And I do see many more women. I think that actually I've read some studies that show that at this point there are more, obviously the percentage is still small, but it's higher than in blockchain space than it's in computer science in general. So it's really, really changing. And I think it's a very positive thing. And to be honest, with everybody that I've spoken to that come from the outside and assume, this is like very weird environment and everybody's like super into anarchy and all that stuff. Everybody's response at the end of the day is, wow, I didn't realize everybody's so friendly here. Like, how does that happen? So I do think that it takes specific people, like, you have to have certain quirks to be very engaged in this industry, but it is getting better. It's getting there.
It is, yeah. I think Bitcoin and blockchain in general seem to be growing up, and one of the things I think about the space is it really is hardcore back-end work, and it breaks the stereotype that the women that get involved in engineering all tend to be front-end, which is a comment I hear quite a lot. I'm very proud to say one of our best engineers in N-Chain is pure back-end, and she can kick the asses of almost any of the boys. So, I've got one last question, which is about the nature of dealing with open source communities. I work in a very corporate environment now, and of course that's kind of a little bit different in that technical strategy tends to come from the top down, and we obviously encourage creativity at all layers of the organization. But in an open source community, you don't have any kind of a hierarchical structure like that. So what are the kind of unique challenges of managing these distributed and volunteer groups of engineers to get stuff done?
Lack of incentives. Like everybody's there spending their own free time. You know, the situation where they are actually mandated to contribute, like Bosch is very heavily currently contributing to Hyperledger, and they have a army of developers that are being paid to contribute back to Hyperledger, but that's very rare. Dealing with the fact that people are doing it out of their own goodwill, encouraging them to work together and to want to contribute back. It's really easy to convince people to use open source. Everybody wants free code. It's much harder to explain to people that if it's only being taken and nobody's giving back, there won't be anything to take at some point. So I think the sensitivity to the differences in cultures and kind of approaches, and also understanding what different perceptions of what open source means and is, combined with the lack of financial incentive to contribute back, is one of the things that I still am learning how to do, right? How to deal with.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I've worked in a lot of open source communities myself in the past, and it's an interesting and unique challenge. But the results are, well, they can range along a big spectrum, but they can be spectacular.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've approached time now, and I'm actually going to be signing off as host, and Francesca Pollard will be taking over for the next session. So. I'd like to thank Marta for a very informative presentation, and please stick around for the next bit.
Thanks so much for having me.